on a voluntary basis. And that is very important for us as a country, that we take the initiative, and those initiatives now lead to a space where we now have everything gazetted, and everything now, the responsibility that is given to producers to manage their waste across from the point just that. Another very important initiative is that the encouragement to produce sustainable products, so that be they packaging, you are required to have at least as much as possible. And that will be incentive enough for us to have more sustainable products, more sustainable packaging within the ecosystem. So this comes with a very great opportunity, and coming at a time when in Africa we have South Africa, which has officially put their EPR regulations in place, but also other countries coming in, like Ghana, which is in the process. But of course, there are also aspects of voluntary EPR mechanisms across the continent. And so that is where our discussion centers today, and to look at how the whole aspect of EPR is going to be regulated, but most importantly, what is the opportunity? How is business going to be? Is it going to be business as usual? Is it going to disrupt the space? Is it going to disrupt the space for the better or for the worse? Does it have economic consequences to the players who are already within the space, and looking at what is regulated? Because again, not all products or services are regulated, so we will hear from the experts what are those products that are regulated, and how do they affect you if you are in that particular value chain. Again, if you are a player within the space, you are a service provider, what does it mean for you? This is what we want to unpack today with our panel, and at the end of it, we will have more interactions between the panel and the audience, so that your questions are answered. If you are online, you will you'll be given a chance to ask your question, and then we move the discussion. And then we have James Odongo, who is the CEO, Kenya Producer Responsibility Organization. Karibu, gentlemen. We have also from GFS, we have Sarah from GFS, Karibu. And then from We Center, we have Joseph Oliege. I, at this point, want to hand it over to Tobias Bele, who is our Communication and Knowledge Management Lead. He's going to take us through the panel discussion, and probably also get to know more about the panelists from themselves. It's always good to hear from the horse's mouths, right? So we look forward to a very engaging audience, both from the online space and those who are physically here with us. Karibu, Tobias.
Thank you very much. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for this very important conversation. The EPR regulations that were gazetted by the government of Kenya recently are very consequential as far as waste management goes, as far as our aspirations for having a circular, inclusive, and a green economy goes. And this conversation adds to that development in terms of trying to, and how does that look like? Just as my colleague Vincent has mentioned, also asking the question, what are the emerging opportunities that are coming up as a result of the official gazettement? And for those who are joining us online, meet for the YouTube live as well as Facebook. My panelists, as an opener, your initial reflections on the And I'll begin with you, James.
So by way of introduction, once again, my name is James Odongo. I work for the Kenya Extended Producer Responsibility Organization as a CEO. Now, with respect to initial reactions towards EPR regulations, it's a case of a double-edged sword. So on one hand, I think all industry players within the room would be say that we are happy that the regulations have finally come in. On the other hand, there are few tweaks, and that also points to the reality that we might have a few issues as far as implementation is concerned. So first, there's an introduction around what they're calling the Restoration Fund, where importers would be required to pay 150 shillings per item on what they're importing. Not to go into the verbatim, but they say per item, so it's at the discretion of the authority or whoever will be implementing the EPR regulations to decide what per item is. And so to help you paint a picture, if they choose to use this as the SKU or per item, if your pen is 10 shillings, you need to add 150 shillings. So we still don't know how that will be interpreted, but it is our hope that there will be some clarity even as we move. The other issue that we potentially see is a mismatch between the provisions of the law and the implementation. So what we've been seeing as far as being in a voluntary, semi-voluntary ecosystem as KEPRO is that there's some anxiety about around implementation of EPR, and moving from lip service to implementation of the regulations is that there's some misinformed perception by NEMA and a few select individuals within the authority that EPR is coming in as a holy grail to solve all waste management problems in Kenya, and to the extent that even the minister himself seems not to be aware of actually what is the intention of EPR. So we've seen him out there saying slaughterhouses and whatever, and link them up with manufacturers and producers and saying, oh, through EPR you're going to clean up rivers. But you see, cleaning up rivers is, it's like bandaging a wound. You'll only be doing so much. And what I usually say is we are legitimizing bad behavior. We are saying it is okay for Joseph, it is okay for Sarah to dump waste into the river because KEPRO, GFS, we center will come and clean up tomorrow because EPR requires that, or rather someone at NEMA believes that EPR is supposed to do that cleanup exercise. So it's, as I said, it's a double-edged sword. Good stuff, but there are also certain pitfalls that we might face as we move towards implementation. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And that's part of the reason why we are having this conversation, to ask ourselves what are the solutions that we can pursue going forward. Joseph, there are two Josephs. So Joseph, CEO KCAC, what are your initial thoughts on the gazetted EPR regulations as we kick off this conversation?
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, by way of introduction, my name is Joseph Mabula.
Is the mic on?
Hello? Oh, yeah. Okay. Good. Now that the mic is on. So my name is Joseph Mrabula from the Kenya Climate Innovation Center. So my reflections looking at the new EPR regulations is that it is a logical next step in terms of the evolution of environment management in this country. This country has not a very long history, but a history nevertheless of trying to manage its environment sustainably and creating economic opportunities out of the environment. In 1999, we enacted EMCA, the Environment Management and Coordination Act, basically to try and create a clean, healthy environment at that time, because we did not have a framework, a legal framework for doing that then. In 2015, we then created an amendment to that act, basically to align to the new constitution. So provide for public participation, but also make it now mandatory for the government to provide a clean and healthy environment as provided for in the new constitution. Before then, in 2006, we had done the solid waste management regulations. Now, they are basically supposed to do partly what the EPR is doing, but they were not mandatory. They were basically, compliance was voluntary. So I look at the current EPR regulations then as a next logical step, in the sense that they now make it mandatory for people, for producers to take, to do a whole life cycle approach in terms of the way they manage whatever comes out of their waste. And that will do a number of things for us as a country. One, we are a member of the Global Compact, so what basically that means is that we need to align our development to the SDGs. So this will help in terms of achieving a number of SDGs, specifically SDG 1 around no poverty, SDG 3 around health, SDG 12 around responsible production and consumption, and then obviously climate action, SDG 13. And then because of the way it is framed, then it will naturally align to SDG 17 around partnerships. And then in terms of vision, we look at ourselves as being a newly industrialized country by 2030. Now, we all know that the next industrial revolution is not going to be anything but green. And so this is part of that progression towards a green industrial revolution in the country as it is here. So those are my initial thoughts when I saw these regulations. Thank you.
I think we'll get the technical team to try and fix that. Thank you very much for those reflections. On to you, Joseph 2.0. Joseph Oliech from WE Center. What are your initial reflections from the just gazetted regulations? Let's share James's microphone, because I know it.
It's not good. Yeah, I'm Joseph Oliech from the WE Center, where we do electronic waste management, and I manage projects at the WE Center. I've been in this e-waste space for 12 years now, and as an organization, we pioneered e-waste management in this country and in this region. I'm looking at the positive aspects of this EPR regulation. One, I'm seeing, from the space that we operate, yes. E-waste management is very expensive, and with the enactment or gazettement of the EPR regulations, strongly believe that we are going to get a structured way of managing problematic fractions in e-waste, and this will go a long way in ensuring that we have a clean environment and ensuring circularity as well, because the EPR regulations are based on polluter pay principle, which means the biggest polluters and the biggest producers polluting the environment would have to work on structures to make sure that we need to have both of them around. Let me here so that I can get my Bluetooth. So e-waste management is expensive. With this EPR regulation, we believe that producers will try to think through the design for materials for production, because with the EPR regulation, of course, the cost and the fees that you pay will be directly connected to the pollution or the toxins that are contained in the materials or the products that you recycle. And therefore, we believe producers will try as much as possible to make sure that the devices and the products that they produce are less toxic to the environment. It's a new space that is going to create more jobs for the young people. For those who are involved in the US value chain, a lot of green jobs are going to be created. We have witnessed that. These are things that we have done, and we have to confirm that more jobs could be created in this space. I am also seeing alignment with the counties. Looking at the Sustainable Waste Management Act, we have the provision for material recovery facilities. And I do believe that what we are having with the EPR regulations will help us to collaborate more with the counties, collaborate more with other producers, and to ensure that efficient structures are created for waste management and waste management in general. And lastly, one thing that probably we need to look at is the standards for recycling. We have Sustainable Waste Management Act. We are going to have the EPR regulations. But when I say I'm a recycler, what do you recycle? I say I recycle waste. Fine. Or I recycle e-waste. Okay. How are you going to recycle a fridge? I may pick it, dismantle it into various components and sell. But what happens to the gases that we are going to produce? They'll be released into the environment. So lack of the standards for EPR regulation is something that I feel is still a gap that we need to close, to make sure that as we talk of waste management, as we talk of EPR regulations, and we talk of recycling, we have very solid structures to make sure that this is done. I learned the other day, a week ago, that the EPR regulations, or the PRO structure in India failed. We need to look at what happened in India, why the PRO structures have failed in India, and those learning points probably will help us to know how to build our EPR regulations and PRO structures to be more sustainable and for a long-term implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On to you, Sarah. What are your initial reflections? Is this a move in the right direction? Should we be celebrating, or should we be worried? What are your initial reflections?
Good morning, everyone. I don't need to reintroduce myself again. Like James has said, for me it's double, it's 50-50. One, because of the way the final text came out. He has highlighted something about importers. So who are the importers? Their obligations have not been clearly stated out in the regulation. So as the text reads, they are only obliged to pay a certain amount to regulator only, and not former PRO. And we know very well that majority of our goods come in through importation. Then number two is, as a celebratory move, is because we tend to trade a lot with the EU and the Americas. So the EU is moving towards the deal, 30. That means we have aligned ourselves with our traders, with our key trading partners. There's a conversation around having global EPR schemes, and the countries that already align themselves with EPR regulations, that means we'll be able to benefit from the conversations that are taking place. However, the other side of it is our regulations are not communicating. So we need to go back a little bit. I don't know who is going to or is we need all of us to align ourselves to key about EPR. The other thing is what just 2.0. With EPR now, we'll have more green jobs, better investment in the recycling. Because what most is, do you have regulations in place? Do you have policies in place so that you are able to, they can bring in the money? So that is my point of view. So it's double-edged. One key other thing is that the county governments have been left out from the regulations, and environment is a devolved function. So what will be their role? And yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, lady and gentlemen, for the initial reflections. We were supposed to have another lady on the panel, but she's not been able to join us from the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. It's important as we have this conversation to appreciate the context in which we're having the conversation. We are just from COP29, which is chaotic. Some have lauded it as a success. It's still up for debate. What we are discussing right now, still we could not have Dr. Ayub Mashari on this panel from NEMA to weigh in on some of the concerns in terms of what finally went into the text and what the fees and the issues stipulated in Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 actually mean for PROs and other stakeholders. So this is the context in which you're having this conversation. And as a whole, the EPR regulation, if we could summarize it in a second or in a text, it's looking at shifting the responsibility to producers, a life cycle kind of responsibility from production to the very end life cycle of their product and packaging. It has the polluter pay principle, and it is aligned to the circular economy aspect. James mentioned about the obligations to producers, to importers, to brand owners, and all that. And some of the key stakeholders that are mentioned in this regulation are the producers, the PROs, and the regulator, NEMA, which is referred to here as the authority. It also has a provision on compliance mechanisms and reporting. So just an overview of what this entails. So as we venture into the conversation on pathways to implementation, and I'll begin with Joseph Morabula on this. What do you see in terms of entrepreneurial opportunities that this is going to present, particularly for organizations like KCAC that are working with climate enterprises? What opportunities do you see here in terms of tapping into it within the framework of the EPR?
Thank you. You can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, very well. So opportunities around the EPR regulations. First of all, let me say that the EPR regulations are trying to address a clear challenge, and that's a challenge of management of waste and the responsibility of every actor within the ecosystem on how to manage the waste. Now, every time you then try to address a challenge, that creates in itself an opportunity. So the opportunities around waste management can be summarized in a continuum. First of all, let me say that the most important letter in the EPR is the P itself, producers. And so, for us to be able to implement fully the EPR regulations, one, we need a fairly informed high number of producers. And so these producers, first of all, have got to be generated, so to speak. You've got to have organizations that are producers of waste and become members of the PROs, and then comply as it is. So what are the entrepreneurial opportunities in the space? So we are going to have quite a lot of opportunities around the traditional West cycle, which is production, segregation, logistics, and then finally to the next stage in the circular economy. So those will still be opportunities around there. But let me now speak about what I think are the new opportunities. One, at knowledge management level, I see a lot of consultancies coming up, basically to help organizations comply. What you see in the schedules to the EPR regulations is that there are lots of licensing to be applied for. Those licensing require a lot of documentation. You will need organizations that can then help enterprises navigate those regulations and have their applications approved within the timelines that are set in there. I think 14 days with a notice of 7 days. So lots of consultancies and knowledge management opportunities are right in there. Then secondly, you have inbuilt in there are also things like deposit refund schemes. Because as producers, if you are Strathmore University, for instance, doing the coffee shops, that coffee comes in a cup, and I think everybody who's bought coffee around knows that. That cup has got to be disposed of in a certain way. So there's going to be opportunities for producers then, therefore, to create deposit refund schemes, and then have people who actually are able to trace this waste, so to speak, and then return it, and then be able to get back the deposits. From a financial perspective, then you can see the financing opportunities around all this, because people have got to afford, first of all, to be able to run their business. They have got to be able to finance their business, and people have got to be able to afford deposits as it were. And then in terms of just technology, then there will be opportunities around businesses that integrate technology in this for tracing the waste, for being able to link it to the nearest logistics center so that then it can be collected, or for basically being able to provide a smart way of reaching waste, of collecting it, of recycling it, and of registration. And then there'll be opportunities basically around digitization, because all have got to be run in an efficient way, link the registry systems or the regulator. There'll be opportunities around all these chain. So the question for organizations such as KCIC, for ourselves, is what will be our role in all this as it is. We will not be competing with our clients. Incubation, have people with ideas, support them to become businesses, and therefore create members of PRO now with businesses to become the way I see it is to create partnerships, members of individual responsibility schemes, so that then there's a whole ecosystem approach in terms of how all this is managed. So we will be doing quite a bit of business people, that's business
how of compliance to the EPR regulations, and at what?
Just to circle back to something Joseph 1.0 has said is GFS East Africa, so we are already doing that work across the East African community countries. And it's all for all waste streams, from plastic all the way to textile and even vehicles if the vehicles manufacturers would want to come in. So bottle, you either you refill the soda, so you get a new soda, give the opportunity for. What does that mean for the consumer? You don't throw it away because you know there's some bit of money that is waiting for you. A year or so, or 2 years back, we are the best. We are the best when it comes to the 4 hours. Reuse until it is no more. It's just to make sure that the consumers themselves are responsible of how they throw away the products they bring in, and also introduces the principle of quality to the producers and circular designs. But James would be in a better position to answer the part for consumers.
Okay. Please weigh in on that, James, and as you do, also touch on make consumers complacent in terms of their responsibility. So as you weigh in on the DPR aspect and the consumer involvement, what are your sentiments on that?
Okay, thank you. So even before I, of course, started as a voluntary ecosystem of all these boxes as issues around research and innovation. For instance, this year we established an accelerator program just to try and have our circular packaging or circular business models. We are also looking at ourselves as a program just to try and have our circular packaging or circular business models. We are also looking at ourselves as a knowledge partner or a technical resource entity for not only Kenyan entities trying to accelerate realization of a circular economy in Kenya, but also over and beyond that, we are also helping other you to Zambia through the Employer Association has also reached out to us. We are supporting them to draft their green transition policy. And so over and above, what is required of us as a producer responsibility organization is that out of our 890 members, not all are required to comply. So what value the compliance? And so that has also necessitated us to think. We launched something information that EPR is coming as a holy grail, as I earlier said. And so in Kenya, in KEPRO, we are saying, as there is the extended producer responsibility, we also having the extended consumer responsibility, where it's not a case of just because KCRC has produced a bottle, once James gets with it from Strathmore, I can easily throw it out of the window of my car because EPR is there and KCRC will come and clean it as a producer. Because EPR is there and KCRC will come and clean it as a producer. So here, I don't want to go into this basics of psychology and the likes, but that even as we are moving towards EPR, the buck doesn't stop with the producer. The actual reality is with the consumer, because as long as James is disposing of his wastes in a mixed manner, not putting it in the bin in the first place or not putting it in the right bin, then there's only so much you can be able to achieve, however much amounts of money will be able to pump into the system as incentivization and the likes is concerned. Of course, as we move towards more progressive ecosystems in terms of EPR implementation, we'd also want to see that the consumer is taking a further step. Apart from proper disposal of waste, segregation of waste and source, then can we also start seeing Kenyans embracing ethical consumerism? So affinity for recycled products, affinity for more circular packaging and the likes, where we are seeing laminates, composites, not only are they paying fairly highly eco-modulated fees, but they're also finding it rough to get consumers to purchase their products. So such eco-consciousness will also be a very good entry point for us to see consumers also playing a critical role as far as environmental stewardship is concerned. So by and large, incentivization is not just it, it's also a case of awareness and deliberate behavior change.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So incentives are not going to be enough. There has to be a deliberate attempt at behavior change, and even down to even the values as a society that we hold in order to actually achieve long-term success.
Yes, and why I say that, for instance, we moved to the woven bags with the intention of reusability. But how many times do you carry your bag from home, come and in the supermarket? And in this case, you are paying for it, 50 shillings, 100 shillings every other time. So unless you're saying incentives will be more than 100 shillings, then really we need to have the truth, the reality that incentives will only factor the need for.
And also individual compliance, for example, if follow the law to make sure that they manage their waste very well. We do a lot of awareness, public education, to make sure that the public is aware of how waste is supposed to be managed. A number of spaces to make sure that enforcement agencies, regulators, policy framers are also aware of what they need to do, and producers are also aware of what we do as an organization. So I would say that as an organization. So I would say that Waste Center is well positioned. The infrastructure has already been built. It is there. The next thing that we want to see is more of the producers coming to the organization to work with us for the waste management. And of course, the producers, also the PROs, are also coming to work with the organization. According to the law, we should have a maximum of 3 PROs in the country. And each PRO should register close to 30% of the market share. With our infrastructure, we are well positioned to do that. And we want to believe that more jobs are going to be created in this space. When you look at the global production, we produce 62 million tons of USD every year with a value of close to 51 billion USD. Coming down to Africa, we produce 2.9 million tons of waste, and that is valued at around 3.1 billion. If we don't manage that waste, we are looking at around 9.4 million tons of CO2 released in the environment. So if you look at the economic benefits that we get from this and environmental benefits that we get when we do electronic management, we see motivation for us as an industry to build the right infrastructure that is required. And we also see an opportunity for us to collaborate with investors, because once we have a regulatory framework to support such kind of initiative, investors will be more comfortable to invest in infrastructure and support opportunities that will generate revenue, manage the environment, and of course, sort and resolve the social and economic issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You mentioned that We Center already has the infrastructure. You already have the systems and everything put in place.
Now, I think we pride ourselves in being a tech-enabled PRO, right from the application process as a member. We've literally had members who've been our members from 2021 but have never stepped into our offices, because the application process, the acquisition of your membership certification, monthly volume declaration and the likes is done on a tech platform. In terms of looking into the future as an opportunity, and I think Joseph, the CEO of KCIC had alluded to this, is that we are looking at scaling up digital innovations, those that are already in the market, and potentially developing in-house solutions, because one fundamental issue that PROs will ultimately face as we move towards a mandatory ecosystem is the requirement to work with various actors, including the informal waste pickers. But the success of an EPR scheme is premised on both financial flows and material flow. So there need to be a clear and auditable trail as far as the issues on flow of material, flow of finances and the likes. That has not been able to, we are yet to be able to unlock that. So with multiple PROs within a product category, as you said, maybe 3 PROs per product category, how are we going to be sealing the loopholes for double dipping between PROs issues around declaration of the same volume by value chain actors for subsidies from PROs and the like. So that is an opportunity that we see for digital innovators, just to be able to put in place a foolproof system, so where we can potentially even be able to geotag waste, so that if Joseph here wants to declare waste to KEPRO to be paid, we can be able to tell that he's not first declaring industrial waste. Secondly, he's not doing waste from Dandora to come and ask us to pay him. And in a typical scenario, have the same waste being declared to KEPRO for payment Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That is one platform that we see being an opportunity for digital innovators. The other one that we see as a good entry point is the marketplace. So the Jumias, the Ubers, the little apps for waste management. So that if James has waste in Kisumu, can KEPRO be able to locate it, have some sort of a market linkage being enabled by a tech platform is also a nice to have and potentially a must have as we move to the more mandatory EPR ecosystem. The other bit is what Joseph Adalia mentioned, and I seem to be piggy banking on his point, is that as PROs will be required to not only conduct audits to our members, but NEMA will also be conducting audits to the PROs for purposes of compliance. This, from a face value, is almost impossible. I mean, with 890 members already, that is a nightmare if you want to do physical audits. So what we might be much welcome.
So happy that question was made for me.
Might be much welcome.
So happy that question was made for me. And the other thing I'll just add is on digital passport about the segregation and collection, just also to avoid the free riders that will come in. And as GFS East Africa, we have experience with our sister company. We understand how free riders can be excluded, and with that knowledge, we know what the do's and the don'ts. The other thing on digital innovation is how to the communication awareness. So is it we need to get some, for instance, where most people are Instagram. I'm currently exploring something using AI, on how to communicate the recency from that whole process. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And from your contributions, it clearly sounds like it doesn't work if there is no multi-stakeholder. We'll come back to that, but I'd like to hear some sentiments from the floor. One can help me with the microphone. Just take questions as we try to chat.
Is it morning or afternoon? Either. Gontai Eric is my name. I am a technical lead to Nairobi Metropolitan Waste Community Network. Allow me to say this by design or otherwise.
a circular economy conversation towards. Otherwise, good job on all the efforts.
Thank you very much. I think I'd like us to handle the questions and then can get another chance later. There's another question that is directed to James from the chats, and it says that we plastic recyclers are having challenges in recycling multi-layered and heavily printed flexible plastics. What policies are you putting in place to help overcome this challenge? I see Sarah laugh. I think she knows what the problem is. Hopefully also where the solution is. Thank you for those questions. And before I give it to the panelists to answer the questions, because they're the ones who are on the hot seat, just to mention that this is the first of many. These regulations were gazetted just the other day. This is the first of many. There's a lot of a multi-stakeholder approach that is needed to bring them to life. This is the first of many meetings and conventions to discuss on what are the pathways to implementation. I'm saying that in response to what my good friend here mentioned about waste pickers, waste workers. To what extent are they involved in this conversation? I know there are quite a number that have joined us virtually. I know from KCAC we have quite a number of enterprises that we support that are in this conversation. But this is a first of many, and the approach we are hoping to take is how do we seek solutions together, collectively, as we move forward. So I think, Joseph, you might want to take the first question. Joseph Murabula, on what programs is KCAC putting in place that maybe target the waste pickers or the waste workers, maybe just for you to clarify the mandate of the organization in that regard, and then I can have the other panelists.
Thank you. You can hear me?
Yes.
Good. So I think that was a very important question because from optics, you are not seeing people directly in the waste value chain on the panel. I think that was your issue, and your direct question is what programs does KCAC have for people in the waste value chain? Just as a way of introduction, I need to say that as KCAC we focus on 5 thematic areas. We focus on agribusiness, we focus on water, we focus on renewable energy, we focus on commercial forestry, and importantly for today's conversation, we focus on waste management. So everything around waste management, as long as it can be created into an entrepreneurial opportunity or a commercial opportunity, we are basically there to support. So directly in terms of our support, we support waste management under 2 programs. There's what we call Greenbiz, and Greenbiz looks at commercializing technologies within the 5 thematic areas that I have mentioned. So if you have a good idea, a good innovation, a good technology that it's still at nascent stage and it needs to be supported to become a commercial enterprise, then Greenbiz will be able to support you. Now, directly and just specifically for the waste management value chain and their actors, we have a program called SWIFT. There it is, if you can see that name. SWIFT stands for Sustainable Waste Innovations for Future in Transition, and we know the transition is digital and is green, isn't it? So that is the transition. So if you have an idea around waste management that can support those 2 transitions, then we are there to, again, support you. And we'll be able to support you, that idea, we'll be able to incubate it to become an enterprise and support it to become a commercial entity through what we call acceleration. And what sort of, I think, the next logical question is what sort of, how does that support look like? I think we have quite a number of people here in the SWIFT program, but just for the summary, there is support around business advisory. So we'll be working with you to actualize your business plans, to actualize your strategy, to actualize your marketing plans. There's support around financing. They support pure grants, what we call proof of concept grants, and repayable grants. And basically this is supposed to support you to create a business out of your idea around waste management. There is also support around market access or information access generally. This is where now we support you to provide with market intelligence to show you where market opportunities for your products are. There is, of course, also support around facilities, both physical and product development facilities, because you may have an idea, you want to create a product out of it, and so you need machines, you need technology, and so we'll be able to help you access those facilities. And for those who are near our offices, we also provide physical facilities for you. You may have started off a business, you don't have an office, you don't have meeting rooms, you don't have space to work from, you don't have internet, you don't have a website. So we give you all that. We have incubation spaces in all our offices where you can come and work from. You get access to meeting rooms, you get access to a locker to keep your things, you get access to a desk to work from. We help you do our website so that you have web presence and basically that sort of thing. So everything you need to be able to succeed is something we're able to provide. I hope I've done justice to your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. On to you, James. There was a question that was directly targeted at you, but also the question from Benson, a question from Anthony in terms of the practicality of some of these provisions.
Okay, thank you. So I'll try and move to, I'll combine two questions, one from Anthony and the one from Lemo around the multi-layered plastics and the SQPs. Now, first to Anthony, we need to understand that we must also move away from what has been fed to us to be deemed as being politically correct. Because the idea is, we keep on saying waste is wealth, right? So the reality is that packaging is not the problem, mismanagement is the problem. So I think first we must be cognizant and do some sort of a root cause analysis and ask ourselves, is it really the packaging or is it our behavior around the waste? So the answer for me would be mismanagement, because the SUPs and the other multi-layered fractions are feeding into a pent-up demand, because right now if you are told at every point you want to go and buy sugar, go and use, or rather go with your container. So we'll be meeting you and finding you with a container walking around Carrefour, going to buy sugar. So you can imagine. So the idea is that it's a convenience for the consumer, but the problem is the aspect of its management. Nevertheless, that notwithstanding, as KEPRO and I believe as other PROs will be required, is that there needs to be concerted efforts around moving towards what we are calling design for recyclability, and to an extent, design for efficiency. So when you do a life cycle assessment, even as you're moving towards recyclability, then a cost-benefit analysis would be more doing away with the packaging as opposed to recycling and the like. But the fundamental question that we need to, or rather we posed to our producers, and it's an increasingly dominant conversation. We did a route mapping or an analytical mapping to understand what is the problem when we talk about moving towards more circular packaging. And the answer that came out is that most of these businesses, they don't know what is the business case for recyclability, business case for circular business model. And the reality is all these businesses are there for profits. So if they're not going to see any ROIs on investments towards recyclability or circular business models, then there's only so much they will do as far as efforts are concerned. So we are doing a lot in terms of equipping them with knowledge from different knowledge partners across the globe, just to try and help them understand what is the business case to to transition into more circular business models and packaging. And the idea that is coming out is for those that are visionary, is that the steps you make now are towards future-proofing your business. I think most of these businesses are now realizing it's a bit of a headache having to contend with issues. Anytime plastic is mentioned, it is demonized. So first is moving towards more circular packaging, and of course now them understanding that it is for their good as far as future-proofing their business is concerned. So we are working with other partners. Kenya Plastic Pact has put out a list of what they deem as problematic fractions or materials. So also working with them and our members through that journey to now start eliminating or phasing out what are deemed as the problematic materials. And this is also answering the questions towards LEMO. We are well aware that the multi-layered plastics are quite a nuisance. Of course, now with the EPR, we are going to be starting to see more innovative solutions to some of these challenges. Tied to the issue of multi-layered plastics, critical requirement by law is the aspect of eco-modulation. So here you'll be seeing that producers or members who are dealing with more problematic materials, the multi-layers and the laminate, will be paying a lot more EPR fees compared to the likes of the HDP and other easily recyclable materials. Of course, we've also provided them with a platform in the form of an accelerator program. So besides equipping them with the knowledge towards transitioning to design for recyclability, we're also providing them a platform for peer-to-peer knowledge transfer, knowledge sharing, where you're saying company X is doing this, could we be able to replicate it in company Y? If company Z is doing it at a lower scale, can company J be able to help them scale it up and the like? So those are some of the upstream interventions we are doing, both from an SUP and a multi-layered plastics point of view. On traceability and collection, I'd hoped one of these guys would be able to help me, but I think I wouldn't want to belabor the point that tech is the only way that EPR will be able to work. So having that traceability and auditability system, and this can only be, of course, I also have to give a disclaimer that my tech knowledge ends at Microsoft Excel, but I do realize, I know that blockchain and tech and all that stuff will be required as far as the future of EPR in Kenya is concerned. In terms of the clear next steps for consumers, Section 12 is already prescribing what we'd call punitive consequences for consumers as far as separation of waste and source is concerned. But fortunately, we work with you closely, and you know. And of course, this is also a requirement for PROs across, from a regulatory standpoint, is that we need to do a lot of capacity building and awareness as far as driving behavior change is concerned. So besides the punitive fines, 20,000 per incident and the likes, there would also be increasing interaction with consumers on awareness and capacity building. Of course, incentivization modules will be coming up to ensure that we are disrupting the existing behavior and market dynamics. For the consumer, there's also a new generation of very woke consumers that is cognizant of their role as far as environmental stewardship is concerned. And as he rightly put it, once the train has left, then you can only remain behind for so long. Eventually, it will be able to catch up with you. You know, at some point I was wondering why my sister here was looking at the Retirement Benefits Authority website, but she has given her reasons. But also to piggyback on that time, back then matatus had a very weird culture. But at some point, a law was put in place and enforcement was done. Of course, the Gen Zs might not relate, but we used to have the first and it was chaotic. But now we see some relative order. Unfortunately, we've lost on some gains, but it was worse compared to what we have right now. And the idea is it started with a movement, and that movement was able to influence other consumers. And I believe that is what we'll also be seeing within the West ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sarah, maybe you could weigh in, and as you do, talk about the involvement of waste workers, reclaimers, and waste pickers, and particularly how PROs are going to do this going forward with now an EPR framework in place.
I'll start with the blockchain question. I would like you to look at Empower INC. They really do, they're doing some bit of work on that. The last time I interacted with them, I was still working in the plastic industry, which I've since left. But they have a proper way of incorporating blockchain to from the household all the way to the end product. And that's where the digital passport comes in. My IT, the only IT I know is Control-Alt-Delete, so I won't be the best person to help you in that. When it comes to the involvement of the waste pickers, waste collectors, all those, the waste management value chain, there's something called the just transition, and that has to come into the fact that the authority realizes that we have different segmented waste value chain managers at they're in very small. We have the person who picks the waste from my apartment, who takes it to the main aggregator, then who takes it to a recycler. And since all of them are at different stages, so what does it mean from the licensing point of view? So are they all required to pay the same licenses? No. And I hope they did submit their comments. I think last year or early this year, NEMA issued a revised request for comments on one of their licensing policy or act. The other thing is all PROs are mandated to give, to submit their, their work plans with signed agreements from the waste pickers and the waste collectors and even the recyclers. The other thing will be to aggregate the waste pickers, waste recyclers and collectors into an association that will give them legality and also bargaining power. When it comes to MLP, and the reason why I was laughing, James understand why I was laughing, is because it's a headache across all recyclers, but the innovation there will come in, and he has talked about penalties. If you don't want to pay the penalty, give the recycling society a solution towards that and actually finance the technology on how to recycle your product. If you actually need to package your product using the MLP. What was the other question?
I think you pretty much covered it.
Oh, there is one, what next for the consumers? One thing I believe is we need to speak the language that everyone understands. I still believe radio is still the best means of communication. And one of the projects as GFS East Africa we have is to develop EPRs for Zanzibar. I didn't know my colleague here also has something in Zanzibar. But one of the key things that we did from my last meeting in Zanzibar was get a Kiswahili word for EPR so that we are able to communicate. If you are going to go to Mulembe FM, you don't need to say EPR. No one is going to understand. We need to get the local language for us to speak. I'll read what the community in Zanzibar decided to be the Kiswahili word for EPR, which is majukumu ya ziada ya mzalishaji. Simple, clear, and that is what is going to go out as communication to the people. So in our aspect, Zanzibar Kiswahili is officially adopted in Kenya. We cannot speak anything better than that. So what we need to do is now get our very own into when James goes to Luo FM, he speaks in that language. or Joseph myself goes to Kameme, I know what to say. The other thing for corporates and other consumers is, as GFS East Africa, with the School of Purchasing, Procurement and Purchasing here at SPS, we have a program that we are about to launch for corporates, so that they can understand, as long as the C-suite does not see the profitability of EPR, then that will not be incorporated into their strategy. So we are hoping as the first quarter of next year, we'll start EPR master classes here, so that we are able now to communicate for the high-end consumers, and now for the PROs, we need to also know how to communicate to our normal, any daily other person. That is me, you, your mom, your shosho, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wow, that's a lot of insights. I come from Homa Bay, but I'm going to attempt to read EPR in Swahili. I wrote it down. If I didn't write it down, I wouldn't have remembered. You said majukumu ya ziada ya mzalishaji. Okay. I think I need an award for actually saying that. So you mentioned something that I just want to once again echo, and that is speaking the language that everyone understands. We've seen that as a challenge even when it comes to climate storytelling and sustainability communications. As long as the language is technical, as long as it's in jargon, people are not going to understand it, and collective action requires everyone without leaving anyone behind. And James, I think if we are able to speak in one language and talk to people in a language they understand, then it can also be a critical gateway to behavior change, if they understand it, rather than if it's in legal terms. Because I asked most of the audience members if they've read the EPR regulations, and not many have read it. It's mostly in regular terms, and it's technical, and it's almost biased towards making it difficult. It's like terms and conditions. No one reads terms and conditions before they download an app or install it on their phone or sign a loan agreement. People just sign. So we need to break some of these conversations down, and that is a responsibility of, I think, every stakeholder in terms of breaking that down. I'll come to you, Oliech, as we talk about, you mentioned on the massive job opportunities that are available when it comes to e-waste, when it comes to the framework of EPR. What do you think needs to be done to promote entrepreneurship in that regard, and how can these jobs be scaled? And maybe just what does that look like in practice? If someone is thinking, how can I get, what are some of these jobs within this space? How does that look like? James, if you could borrow your mic.
Yes. So, as I mentioned that we are currently training 2,400 young people to be in this US value chain. We have so far trained close to 6,000 young people in the US value chain. With this CPR, I'm looking at more green jobs, especially in the MRFs, because when you look at the Sustainable Waste Management Act, there's a provision for the counties to provide incentives by allocating land to the investors, and counties are supposed to get into the PPP arrangement so that the waste recyclers could get to these facilities, establish the infrastructure, and make sure that waste is managed. There's a question that was touching on waste marketplace. What an opportunity in the waste marketplace. Yes. One reason why the PRO scheme in India failed is the nation and the idea that there is so much money in the waste. And the focus is not to circularity, the focus is not towards sustainability and environmental management. So when you look at it, must bear in mind that we need to manage the environment and we need to look at circularity. Waste marketplace would be ideal if you segment it in various fractions, if it is plastic, electronic, and other places. And MRF provides perfect spot for waste marketplace to be practiced. And when you integrate technology now, you could work with predictive data to know places where probably more plastic is generated, US is generated, and you get to know if you are looking at the industry for metal and related things, you know that where to get more copper, iron, steel, it would be this area. This is where I need to put more of my investment to look at that. And when you add that technology, of course, you'll be able to know that I'm based in Kisumu. I have a lot of plastic generated, but I can see that is a company doing plastic recycling in Nakuru. So you could consolidate that and make sure that with technology, even your customers will be able to locate you from the platform and say that there's a lot of iron and steel in Mombasa. We need to organize for logistics, for collection, related things. I am in the repair business, and I repair phones and computers. I need screens for these particular phones. And when you go to the system, you'll be able to actually see that there's someone in Thika with 10 pieces, and I have these, of course, I have clients, so you can actually trade within that platform. In my understanding, that is a better way of looking at the waste marketplace, and also creating the opportunities in aggregating technology to make sure that this benefits the aggregators, it benefits the waste processors, and it also benefits the producers. Once we effectively implement this EPR scheme, the next discussion will be on the value of waste, because the collector and the recycler is not the producer. Who owns the waste? Waste is the cost. To add value or give incentive of e-waste. When you drop your phone, you should be getting maybe 1,000 points. These 1,000 points, you're not getting cash. You go to a convenience store and you're able to get a new electronic device at a discounted rate, or you can buy a new product. That's one way of using technology to make sure that waste is effectively managed, and of course we get value from it. The other opportunities that I could say, once we partner with the counties, once we partner, we create environment for the investors to build the infrastructure for waste management, and NEMA is for the aggregators and also recyclers.
manufacturers is to try and assist them to see what opportunities are available within their value chains for the future out of compliance with these regulations. And there are very many, depending on whatever value chain that you want to look at. There are very many. So I think it's easy to see this. And then secondly, because of the interlinkages around supply chains, then collaborations become key. And what generally tends to happen is that because a lot of responsibility in terms of managing waste relies on what your suppliers or what your consumers do, and people tend to shy away from people who are not compliant. So it makes a lot of business sense for the manufacturers, therefore, to be able to comply in order to create incentives for their customers to work with them, or for their suppliers to work with them. So from a business perspective, compliance is actually relevant for purposes of being able to access inputs and for being able to access markets as it is. And then thirdly, quite a lot of time, what we see manufacturers doing is lobbying government or working with government for relevant policies. It is pretty self-defeating for you not to be compliant with one regulation or the other, and then you're asking government to support you in one or the other. So the business case for compliance is actually very, very strong. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sarah, I'd like to also know what you call incentives in Swahili, as well as circular economy, as well as waste management. If you don't have the answers right now, you can give them to me after this session. But the other question I wanted all of you to weigh in on is on, we've talked about the opportunities that this EPR framework presents for the ecosystem, and we've talked about what this, from a multi-stakeholder approach, what we need to do. But when we began, when you're just starting your reflections, all of you, you all started on attack mode on what's missing or what's not in the framework. And I'd like that to come out quite clearly, because we've had a challenge of policy versus implementation, policy versus framework. The segregation at source, so far so good, has not taken off in the country. Right now, where you're all sitting, what are the gaps that you're seeing in the EPR framework as it is? And are there any additional policy interventions and incentives that need to be put in place to enhance the uptake of EPR? I'll start with you, Sarah.
I don't have the Swahili word for circular economy, waste management, but I'll be going back to the source of Kiswahili in January. I'll come back with the answers. That's good. I mentioned earlier the gaps which are there. For me, I feel there's a mismatch with the draft that was originally what went to the AG and what has come out. So we are still internalizing a lot of it. So there's a lot of conversations between, and I'm speaking from GFS East Africa, since we are a global EPR compliance company. So we are still internalizing what is missing. How do we interlink this with what the EU is doing on EPR, and so that we can just find a convergence. So one thing is a few of the definitions are not there, which were originally there, but we'll find a way of, since we have, all of us have an open communication with NEMA, that is going to happen. There's a few things that need clarity before the six months plus 1 day time period elapses, and that is something James mentioned about per item. We need to know, is it in SKU or is it a shirt, an item? So that needs also a lot of clarity. All in all, the EPR regulations as it is, it's good. It takes the responsibility of your product to your own hands. The days of just doing packaging or products just because they are there is long gone. You'll have to have circular designs. You have to have circularity in your mind as you comply, as you introduce products. The other thing that we urgently need is capacity building for the regulator. That needs to happen as yesterday, because EPR compliance and implementation is not like implementing kufagia kwa barabara. It's a lot of negotiations, assisted compliance that needs to happen between the manufacturers, the producers. I know there will be an uproar somewhere because of that issue of importation, because there's already importation tax, importation duty. Then you need to do this importation directly to NEMA, and then you have to join a PRO. So there's a lot of that negotiations that needs to happen. But the beauty is all of us here work hand in hand. So whatever James is doing, we tend to actually, what are you doing? How can we work together in this? And whatever we center is doing, we are able to have that conversation. In terms of the manufacturers, one thing is that most of these organizations have global offices. So whatever is happening globally needs to cascade down locally. So, because I know most of, from my e-waste experience, all manufacturers of electrical products have product stewardship from the global office. It's only here that they don't implement product stewardship. So that now needs to be headed down. And because the reason why that is not, you find the loophole is because there is no obligation locally from the laws. And from one of my experiences with one of the laptop manufacturers, the HQ told us, we don't see any obligation in your law, so what do you want us to do it in your country? So now, since it's there, now they will be obliged to. So it will come eventually, because the CEOs will have to report on sustainability, since now this goes to the global office that there is EPR in Kenya, so that has to be cascaded down. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Adding to that, James.
Okay, thank you. I know time is a long spent, but in brief, I think Sarah has aptly summarized what the regulations mean. And just to clarify, we didn't come so hard on it. I think we gave a neutral reflection where we are saying it has its good parts, and it has not so negative parts, but what we'd call ambiguous clauses when she refers to importation. The law says we pay EPR fees at point of entry, but if you see a few of the officials of NEMA talking, they are saying even after doing the declaration and making payment to the authority, the product, once entering into the Kenyan market, still is required to register with the producer responsibility obligation. So does that leave room for potential double taxation and the likes? So those are some of the questions that will be coming in. That aspect of ambiguity is still very all over. But the other thing is that the regulations are relatively silent on competition around EPR fees. And speaking to what you had said about India failing on EPR, that was the same problem we had. And although I know they are working behind the scenes to regulate EPR fees in terms of the minimum pricing, but in between, and assuming they actually don't move towards enforcement, it means that the three producer responsibility organizations will not only be competing on membership benefits offering, but also on EPR fees. We are already in that space. The idea is we are at an almost race to the bottom scenario, where we are charging as low as 0.5 shillings, that is 50 cents per kg. Out of these 50 cents, I'm supposed to do audits, I'm supposed to incentivize value chain actors, I'm supposed to give 5% to NEMA at the end of the year, I'm supposed to conduct awareness, I'm supposed to do capacity building. So if there is no logical and sober discussion to ensure that the ambiguous clause around a signed agreement as far as EPR fees is concerned, then literally we are going the Indian way. And that is already, of course, happening also in South Africa with the multiple PRO scenario. So it is good, but the badness is coming with the ambiguity of quite a number of the clauses. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you. I think as mentioned before, the EPR regulations are a logical next step to make us align with the Sustainable Development Goals, align with the legal framework in Kenya, the Sustainable Waste Management Act of last year and the Policy of 2021, and also align with Vision 2030 to be a newly industrialized country. Yeah, but I see a few gaps in there. There is still some work to do to be able to align these regulations with what we call the spirit of the Constitution of Kenya 2010. Now, the reason I say that is that there are lots of penalties for producers if you don't comply in a certain way or the other. So while there is, but there's none for government if the government does not comply. For instance, it requires government to give you a decision once you apply for a license or some other documentation from them. They need to make a decision within 14 days and give you that decision within 7 days. The question then is, if they don't, what happens? So there's no recourse for an applicant in the event that the government does not comply. And because we are talking behavior change, and that's what you need, until you change the behavior of people in government, and that can only come with penalties, then you probably will not get adoption at the rate at which, at the rate required to make all this work. And then second, the other gap I see there is basically in the international environment discourse, you know, whether UNFCCC, UNEP, etc., there's always the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, because everybody is assumed to have different capacities, and therefore you take advantage of what is written on the basis of your own capacity. If you look at this, and taking on for what James has said, there are quite a lot of fees to pay. You have to pay your own PRO, you have to pay for the license, you have to pay for quite a lot of things. What that will do is basically make compliance a preserve of the big businesses rather than the smaller businesses. So for people like us who support innovations and therefore support businesses that are still small, that are still at the idea stage, this is probably an opportunity for us to engage the government and basically see if there can be incentives for startups in here in terms of compliance as it is. And then incentives for just people to start up. I mean, waste management is not a simple sector to be in. So people like Anthony, people like Benson, they are doing quite a lot of great work here. But there's quite a lot of heavy lifting because business models are still not very well understood. And so you would then expect that part of these regulations would be talking about how to incentivize a lot of entrants within the industry so that then we have compliance across, and then we have a lot of opportunity being created across. I think at a glance, those are some of the gaps that I see. Now, thank you.
Thank you very much. Lastly, Oliech, your final sentiments?
Yes. When EPR regulations are fully implemented, the challenges that I'm seeing with these, one, I am seeing unfair competition will be there. Unfair competition for the recyclers in the sense that For example, if we say that majority of the producers go for the collective scheme, so they go to the PROs, and we only have 3 PROs. So this PRO would have the obligation and responsibility of identifying a qualified recycler. But as I mentioned, we do not have recycling standards. So as long as it's a company that is registered by NEMA, they take up the job. What would happen to organizations, startups, and companies that are struggling to build their infrastructure for waste management and recycling? And what would you say will happen to the startups in the informal sector, because 90% of our waste is managed in the informal sector? Engagement with the informal sector would be a bit of a challenge. There are more innovative ideas and solutions that would die with when a large majority of people or majority of producers go to the PRO system. We have products that are not labeled, and they get into this country through a number of ways. Who will take charge of that? Because as for company X, I have a brand. I love to make sure that I pay upfront for that management. So what is the legal structure to make sure that joyriders are adequately handled? The structure, the regulation does not have provision for incentives that will promote investment in this space, because as we speak, we do not have adequate infrastructure to manage waste generally. We have opportunities to turn waste to energy. We have opportunities to turn waste to value in other, many other ways. But now this infrastructure is lacking because waste management is decentralized to be at the county level. What is the central government going to do to support the counties, and what could we say counties should be directly mandated to do to support this waste management at that local level? In generally, we are talking of, when I speak to the US sector, we are talking of the Global Gateway Africa for the EU. This is the twin transition. We are looking at green transition, and we are looking at digital transition. All of them, the point of convergence is waste management, because when you're talking digital transition, more of electronic devices should be produced and consumed and disposed. When you're talking of green transition, we are talking of renewable energy, we are talking of many other solutions that, of course, will use power or energy that does not emit a lot to the environment in terms of CO2. Now, what happens to the end-of-life management? For example, the lithium batteries. The e-mobility sector is growing rapidly, and manufacturers are not concerned about end-of-life management. We could talk of refurbishment or repurposing, but what happens to the end of second life? So some of these factors are not captured in the regulation, and it would be important for us to look at them, because some of these issues and what we celebrate today, in about 10, 20 years' time, would be biggest problems for this country to solve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for your very valid contribution. We've mentioned the gaps that need to be filled. We started by talking about the active involvement of county governments, being that waste is currently devolved. We mentioned about the need to have a very logical and sober conversation with all the partners and with the regulator. We talked about behavior change, not just at the consumer level, but even at the government level. I've not thought about it in that perspective. We talked about ensuring that we don't make compliance a preserve for few. We've talked about unfair competition that Ulich has just mentioned, the lack of recycling standards, and even incentives for investment in the space, alongside everything else that we've discussed today in the spirit of charting the way forward on pathways to implementation of the scheme. I want to thank you very much, the panelists that have joined us for this conversation, the audience members, both here present and those that have joined us virtually on YouTube, on Facebook Live, and on Google Meet. Thank you so much for your time. Let's keep the conversation going as we try to take a multi-stakeholder approach to the implementation of the EPR framework. This is the end of our conversation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So the following three things are going to happen in quick sequence. We are going to have a photo here with the panelists. I'm not seeing the camera person coming in front. Right after that, they are going to resume their seats. And then very briefly, the KCIC Director of Programs is going to give a vote of thanks, Felix Magaju. Thereafter, we are going to have a group photo outside. Those who have not had refreshments can continue doing so as we keep the conversation going. And then you can then immediately leave for your other engagements. You can stay as long as you want. Thank you very much. Felix, please.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Mine is very simple this morning. Before I give vote of thanks, two comments I just wanted to make briefly. Sorry. One of the guys here saying that the train has already left the station, so the wagons have been left behind. But the good thing with the wagons being left behind, the main train can always come for them back. Or perhaps another train, we can't miss another train to come and pick them back. That's number one. Second, I think there's a question that was put across concerning the waste pickers in the ecosystem. Well, the good thing is we have started having some very good discussions with them, and the good thing is I can see the chair here, very passionate gentleman. So we have very good conversations just to ensure that we have been able to support a few of them just before the program comes to an end. So we have some more, close to 2 years to go. So don't feel that you have been left out in the equation. At least you can be a witness. You have had 2 or 3 conversations with you personally. So I'm looking forward that now that the program manager has come back, gentleman Kon Jabez, he was out of the country, so he should be able to help you get a few things moving, and I've already given him a small brief about that. So, ladies and gentlemen, so first and foremost is to appreciate the online community before they run away, to really appreciate them for the support they have given this convening. It's also going to really appreciate all of us. We have sacrificed our time and efforts to be here this morning. As Tobias said, is the first among many. And we have seen their points of discussions and further collaborations and further exploring, not only now with just the producers, but also need to bring the full government in the house. Just tell them these are the pain points. This is, even if the wagon, the main train has left, please just ensure that you have also considered the wagons that have been left behind, and these are the pain points. So it's also going to appreciate all of us. We have really done a little bit of contributions to this. I would expect that we will be having, much more, or many more, so to speak. And finally, at least, very also important to really appreciate our panelists. They have done a good job to really open up. Some of us, we couldn't even know, or let me talk about myself. There are some Kiswahili words I had not envisioned, are not known, but I've known a few of them. Although Sarah, I hope Sarah will be able to really give us, the interpretation of those ones that Tobias and put across to her. And I hope that, Sarah, this gentleman was not harassing you. But anyway, so panelists led by our CEO and then Joseph, both Josephs, and James and Sarah, we really appreciate. Thank you very much for taking your time this morning to really speak to us and have that conversation. You have opened up some of our minds to see where we are coming from, where we are going, some of the pain points that our value chain actors are really experiencing, and we're looking forward to put up one voice with all the ecosystem partners, CAM, KEPSA, and everybody else in that ecosystem, and just push through with one voice. With those few remarks, I want to say thank you very much for everybody. God bless you. Have a good day. Asante.
Thank you very much. Let's go out for a group photo.